Welcome to NightCap. I am Nixi from Pillow Talk with Nixi, and I am your +1 for the night. But first, let's pour ourselves a glass, for the night is never ending and conversations far too interesting. Join me as I dive into topics on human sexuality, social behavior, neuroscience, anthropology, psychology, and politics. It is time for us to break down all the taboos and navigate through the stigma we were brought up with in this erotophobic world. Please note that some of these episodes contain descriptions of sexual violence and trauma that some people may find disturbing. I advise all listeners to prioritize their well-being. So without further ado, perhaps you'd like to join me for a nightcap at the salon. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Nightcap. We have with us a very, very special guest today. Fredrick, thank you so much for joining in on this special episode.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Fredrick, could you let me know how your energies are like today? Because I think we are going to delve into a lot of conversation. And I'm mindful about what energies you're bringing in this conversation today.
Well, we are at the solstice, whether that's a thing that you recognize in the holiday nature or just simply where the sun is located in relation to the Earth and our rotation. And so it is one of my favorite days of the year. Maybe it is in fact my favorite time of the year. And so that part, awesome, yay. There's been a bunch of stuff going on emotionally, which I'm not necessarily going to get into right now on this podcast. So, there might be a few anchors dragging my spirit in some directions right now, but I think that we'll have a wonderful conversation. And you are absolutely brilliant, and I love talking to you, and so I'm full of joy to speak with you tonight.
Thank you so much, and it's always amazing to have a conversation with you as well. I mean, the kind of topics that we come up with every conversation, it's amazing. It's so illuminating. So for all the listeners out there today, Fredrick, could you perhaps give them a background where you're stemming from, what motivated you into this field of Tantra, and what motivated you into combining it with BDSM?
Sure. Well, the funny backstory for the Tantra piece was I was at Burning Man, as you know, and things happen to be.
Yeah.
I was crushing on someone, and they were like, "Well, if we're gonna be together, we need to be intentional." And if they asked me to tie myself into a pretzel, I probably would have said yes. But I'm also a person of my word, and so I was like, okay, I think I know what this intentional thing is, but let's actually figure this out. And I had been kind of hearing the word bouncing around for a few years. I was like, all right, let's try to figure this out more. And they lived in San Francisco, in the Mission District, and they lived at ashram there. And I live in Portland, Oregon, a few hours north. And there was a person traveling from Thailand and traveling around the world, and they were going to be teaching in Portland, and then the next week teaching in San Francisco. And so I was like, hey, there's this Tantra thing. How about if I do it here and you do it there, and then we get together like a week or two later, we could do some Tantra stuff. I had no idea what I was going to go and check out. But I went, and it was really interesting. We talked quite a bit about roots, like the spiritual, energetic, physical roots of feeling your toes in the soil and feel the extension of your spirit down to the core of the earth and up into the cosmos. And so most of what we talked about was that, and then we also had, I guess, a day or two of sort of physical practices, exploring bodies and breathwork, things of that sort. I thought it was kind of neat. And yeah, but I don't know. I guess I kind of got hooked, and it's because of some of my other roots, and so sort of spirituality, ritual practices have always been part of my family lineage and my personal lineage in this body. Actually, I suppose in my last body as well, and the ritual aspect of it, the connectedness, being in the present moment, helps me a lot, both then when I started, back 2006, I think, and then now as well. The BDSM thing, I was born kinky. I started expressing it probably around the age of 3 or 4. And
how did you realize that?
it was just simple sort of fetishy stuff. I just started stealing my parents were physicians, and I started stealing my dad's doctor bag to play doctor in the bushes. And then as I got a little bit older and a little bit more bold, I started tying people up in the woods with vines and things like that. But yeah, so I've always been kinky. But I grew up in a world that pathologized kink. And my father, unfortunately, he worked for the state of Pennsylvania, and part of his job as a brand new doctor was to administer conversion therapy. And in the 70s, conversion therapy, or 60s and 70s, conversion therapy was electric shock therapy. And so that was his job, 3 days a week. He administered electric shock therapy to 10 to 15 patients a day for 8 to 9 years. And it affected him greatly. And it both traumatized him, and to help him rationalize it, he had to basically start believing in the DSM, even though prior and in his heart he didn't believe in the discrimination around kink and homosexuality that the DSM was perpetrating then, and some would say now. So growing up kinky, I only learned of it basically being a pathology, that kinky people were psychopaths. And media shows that all the time. You watch a movie, you watch a TV show, people who are kinky are almost always shown as being a psychopath. And so, even though I've always been kinky, it wasn't until much later in life that I started to better understand what that meant, and nuance, how to express that in consensual ways, in joyful ways. And so, I know you're probably curious at some point to talk about the potential intensity that kink can bring, and I'll happily talk about that. But for me, it does come from that place of Tantra. It comes from that place of energy exchange. It comes from that place of being in your body, mind, spirit in the present moment. And so it all generally comes together. And then the reason my business is Tantra Kink is because I co-taught with a Tantrika in Portland for a number of years. And back in those days, I was an architect. That was my legitimate job. You can't see my air quote around legitimate. But she really wanted me to be a sex educator full-time. She felt that I had a calling for it, I had a skill with it, I had a way of creating comfort for people, and so she really was encouraging me to leave architecture and help people engage their sensuality, sexuality. And one night she bought me a URL. and there we go.
And the magic began.
And Tantra Kink was officially born. And the reason that that name was chosen was because many people consider Tantra and Kink to be at the far ends of a dualistic spectrum. And I'm a non-dualist. I'm non-binary. And so for me, the Tantra Kink is acknowledging the binary that people can believe exists, so that I can engage people where they're starting from. Pardon me. And then to try to not shatter the binary, but to reconsider it and to recognize that life is more like a Mobius strip than a linear pathway. I can babble for hours, so I think that maybe it's good.
Thank you for sharing your story and your journey. And since you have brought it up, and it's one of the topics that I would like to get into, uh, considering that there is a majority of the world that looks at tantra from a very sensual, from a very spiritual point of view, and BDSM in the sexuality and sensuality spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, spirituality and sensuality don't really coincide for a majority of the folks out there.
Mm-hmm.
How would you probably help them understand
Sure.
this combining of energies that you spoke about between Tantra and kink?
Sure. Well, so if you think, so you and I are in the United States, and viewers, listeners might be at other places around the world. The United States is still greatly affected by asceticism, and that's basically this concept that the body does not matter, that we need to go to heaven, and that the spirituality is important, but the body is something to get tossed away, and it's just getting in the way of our spiritual ascension. And so when you look at Buddhism, and so part of my PhD, I'm actually currently looking at 2nd century translations of Pali texts, which was when the Buddhist discourses were first written down. For many centuries, they were not written at all. And then you and I have also talked about Christianity and how Christ studied. And so there's the Brahmin thought, and how the Brahmin caste, if I'm using the right word there, it was more of a higher caste versus the, I'm going to get this wrong, it starts with the letter S. Christ studied with another group that was parallel, but not the upper class of the Brahmins. And so a lot of these original ideas, as they were translated, so what is modern day Christianity was translated through the asceticism of St. Augustus, and then Buddhism was translated through the 17 and 1800s Victorian translations of the Pali texts. And at least as I've been rereading it, which I don't want to offend anyone, and believe me, yippee-ki-yay, Buddha, awesome. Like, I'm not trying to offend anyone there. But my understanding, I'm pretty sure that Buddha was pro-sensuality. I believe the Buddha, in the discourse about mindfulness of the body, specifically recommends that monks masturbate. And I believe that there's a mistranslation of one stanza that basically says the body and the bodily organs are, well, I'll paraphrase, icky. But that's part of my dissertation. I'm trying to figure out if that was a mistranslation or not, because it does not. There are approximately 12 stanzas in this discourse about the mindfulness of the body. All the other stanzas are very pro-sensuality, and I think of sexuality as a subset of sensuality. The Buddha didn't talk about go do it doggy style, or the Buddha didn't talk about those types of sex. The Buddha talked about sensuality, about feeling the sensations upon your body, the breeze passing through your hair or against your cheek, the texture and temperature of water as you dip your fingers in to be able to get a drink. So, but there's this one piece in there that talks about the body, which I believe was an aesthetic translation of that Pali text, and I'm hoping to find some original versions to be able to then engage the language translation to see if it was because of the time that for 300 years all non-Pali, non-Sanskrit based practitioners of Buddhism, or at least, well, people that were going from English translations, possibly have a misinterpretation and believing that monks and people are supposed to be monthly, and that includes not being sensually sexual. And so, at the core of it all, sensuality and sexuality, I think, are one and the same. That for us to feel a connectedness, that is a connectedness in all forms of non-humanism. That's a connectedness to the air, to the water, to other animals, to other people, to people you can see right in front of you and reach out and touch, and people that you can just sense and feel as the butterfly flapping the wings on the other side of the planet. That we all are part of a oneness. Mindfulness is actually about oneness. It's not this whole sitting on a cushion and like chanting. It's a connection of oneness to all that is, past, present, future, because time also is not linear within this understanding of this thing we call reality. And so it just all comes together. And so if you're going to be sensual sexual, I believe that is simply starting with becoming focused in the present moment. And so, yes, you had to do your taxes, and yes, you were in a traffic jam on the way home, and yeah, next week you're going to have to, like, do something. But right here, right now, how are you feeling? Just like you asked me in the beginning of this conversation, how am I feeling right now? And how are your partner or partners feeling right now? Or are you going to be exploring something on your own? All these things are wonderful. But to be true to the present moment, and even though you maybe made plans that you're going to have date night, and you're going to go and have dinner, and then you're going to like make out in the park because that's where you had your first date. Like that's all. These are all lovely plans, but in the present moment, do you still want to go out for dinner? Like, are you hungry? What are you hungry for? What is the food, the liquids, the beverages that you are hungry for? What is the touch that you are hungry for in the present moment? What is going to be most nutritious to you in this present moment? And if we can focus on that nutrition, on what is feeding us, just like the sun, soil, water will feed a plant, to focus on the nutrition in the present moment, then we will have the roots we need to connect to that oneness and to that spirituality.
Beautiful way of putting it, because it taps into this entire field about what do you need versus what do you desire.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it, the duality between I need this to survive, or I need this to feel, I need this to be connected within myself and with others around me, versus the extension of these needs that we call as desires that may or may not come to fruition, and we spend a majority of our time thinking and planning towards those unachievable targets. Since we are on the same platform, I was wondering if we could run some definitions back and forth with respect to what Tantra means for us.
Sure.
How do we understand that? And how do we understand kink or BDSM? Because each and every individual has a different way of looking at that.
Sure.
All the possible definitions out there. So according to you, let's start with Tantra. What according to you is Tantra?
Okay. So as I said, I'm in Portland, Oregon. The majority of my education, well, all of my Tantra education has been on this continent. The first person that taught me was traveling from Thailand and still has an institute there in Thailand. However, they're actually from Romania. And then there's a number of other people that I've studied with that have connections to India, to Vietnam, to Thailand, to China, to Japan. However, my very limited in-person training in Southeast Asia was when I lived in Japan for a short while, and I stayed at a Buddhist monastery at Koyasan for a while, which was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I would love to go back someday. But when I talk about Tantra, I'm not talking about Tantra. I'm talking about Neo-Tantra. And Tantra, in and of itself, it's Anglicization. It's an English word, right? And so, and it is an English word that was picked from many translations of many other words. And so it's, for good or for bad, it's basically a buzzword. And so when we talk about Tantra, we're talking about the Neo version, the newest contemporary version of a buzzword. And so many people are totally happy to stay there. You know, that's so like the mindfulness revolution, for instance. Like there's this critique of McMindfulness, and that to only stay at the surface, to only stay with what is commercially available in the United States and greatly capitalized, you're going to potentially learn some good stuff. I mean, I love mindfulness. I think it's amazing. However, most of the scholars, they always start their research, if you go back to their origins of all of the research, all of them talk about the Kama Sutra, all of them talk about the spiritual aspects of Buddhism. They talk about all these origins, and then one sentence later, they basically step away from it, ignore it, and never go back there again. And so I would encourage people, if they're in the United States, chances are they are going to engage Neo-Tantra. And there's a range of people that do it in a delightful, holistic manner versus a abusive or capitalistic manner, abusive both of money and of cultural appropriation and of people's bodies. So please, buyer beware, do be careful. But I would recommend that if you think it's nifty and you want to explore it more, is to go deeper. Is part of the idea of Tantra that many people in Neo-Tantra will talk about lineages, they'll talk about gurus, they'll talk about teachers, people that they learn from, and how the person they learn from someone else. And that's very important because in spoken word traditions, those traditions were handed from one person to the next, to the next, to the next. With any luck, without interpretation. But if anyone's ever played telephone, if you try to play telephone with 3 people, of course there's going to be interpretation that happens. And you start off with the word penguin, and then you end up with Tyrannosaurus Rex at the end. But well, they're both kind of animals. And so there is that potential, you know, so like when we talk about the translations of the Kama Sutra, when we talked about the translations of the Buddhist discourses, there is a great potential for mistranslation because of the spoken word tradition, and then mistranslation because of Victorian or other time period choice of words in the creation of the modern English texts. But the beauty of the internet, the beauty of interlibrary alone, that you can go a lot deeper if you want, and to really speak with many people. Any spoken word tradition is not about one person being an expert. That's part of white supremacy culture. Even the written word is never sacred. That it is a conversation, and if you have a conversation that is not a monologue, it is a back and forth, and you are supposed to engage these things as a conversation. For you, the listener, your voice is your body, is your feelings, is your emotions, is your spirituality in the present moment. That is your voice. What is that voice saying to you and to what you are learning? And what is meaningful to you? What is helpful to you now? What is maybe not helpful to you now, but if it sits and hangs out in the back of your brain for a while, you might start pondering it, and maybe it'll help you in a few weeks. Or the things that you think are really great and helpful now, in a few weeks maybe won't be. And it's going to be a conversation with yourself, with the traditions that you learn from, the teachers that you learn from, and to just keep that conversation going, knowing that it's a live conversation. It's always going to be changing.
Very lovely take on it. Talking about conversations, talking about journeys, and actually going into figuring out who you are, all the while having a guide or a guru stepping in time and again, giving you the knowledge that is necessary for you to survive as well upon receiving such knowledge. Uh, I think from my end, with respect to what I have been taught about Tantra, or rather what uh, analysis that I have gathered so far, is that it is a tool. And there are three such tools that individuals can use in order to uh, get the most out of the learning that one has to do in life. And if, let's say, every single individual out there is on a quest for knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that could be achieved in three different ways. You've got mantra, that is through chanting, that is through reading,
Mm-hmm.
and could be scriptures, it could be decoding all these texts that you're talking about. It is yantra, wherein the person actually becomes an avid traveler, becomes an adventurer, goes out in the world and experiences things for themselves, and that becomes learning paradigm. Then comes tantra, wherein you are learning through sensation, you're learning through your body, tan meaning body, you're learning through how things in your environment affect you, and how do you behave with respect to the things in the environment. Now, of course, this is a very simple or simplified
Mm-hmm.
process of thinking towards what exactly Tantra is.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many schools of thought. There are so many gurus out there who teach from different perspectives. You have Tantra and black magic, all the way to Tantra, wherein there is actually ritualized sex happening within that particular group of individuals, or the orgies that
Mm-hmm.
were held in certain times in India.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, to people who are actually indulging in what you call as neo-tantra nowadays, where individuals are trying to dive into themselves, discover themselves, and how their energies interact with others in this space, and specifically with their partner or partners that they're
Mm-hmm.
involved in, and how that has a huge impact on themselves. And again, for me, I would say that it is all about uh, being on this quest, being on this journey, and figuring out what knowledge is for
Mm-hmm.
an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that could mean one guru, that could mean several gurus,
Mm-hmm.
because knowledge, if you are isolating yourself to a single school of thought, you are isolating yourself from the rest of the world. So it was often encouraged for individuals within a particular Gurukul to travel from one Gurukul to another Gurukul and learn from other gurus and their
Mm-hmm.
experiences and their teachings, so that they could have PhD in this field. So that's how it
Mm-hmm.
used to happen. And of course, now things have changed. You mentioned capitalism and being the major cause. Back in the day, there were a few things that were said that you cannot charge anything for it. It's considered immoral to charge for education, for healthcare, and I think it was food. I'm not sure,
Mm-hmm.
but nowadays these are the ones that are heavily
Right.
taxed, and you pay a lot.
Well, so there's some really amazing things that you just were talking about, and one of the things I wanted to hone in for a second is you talked about black magic, you talked about orgies, and I think not necessarily you and your full soul, but in the context of the sentence that you were just saying, it sounded like that was in sort of a dualistic paradigm of, you know, badness, evilness, scariness, something of that sort, which is similar to like this whole Tantra BDSM thing, right? This idea of one thing being the scary, the thing that is different than this pure, divine, spiritual. You can't see my hands waving, but I'm trying to, you know,
I
illustrate
get where you're
dualism. Um, and so I think that's a yes and no, right? That
Mhm.
different teachers potentially will consider different things in different ways. And so you can think of it as a spectrum or a series of ingredients. And so one chef or one teacher might consider certain things to be more or less spicy. One chef or one teacher might consider certain ingredients to be acceptable for a recipe or not. And so, like, I've been in a number of orgies, and some of them have been delightful, and some of them have just been kind of curious, and some of them have been flat out creepy. And so, they vary, and it depends upon the way I felt in the moment, right? How did I feel walking into the space? How did my body feel that day, that evening, that moment? How did I feel connection to those other people? Did I really want to be there? Was I feeling connection with the partner that I arrived with? There's so many things that can affect all this. And so, to simplify things, I recommend to always start as a solo practice. And so, like BDSM, that can be a little tricky because, like if you try to do a solo practice for the physical impact, that kind of stuff with BDSM, if you're doing any of the rope bondage, any of those things, you have the risk of, autoerotic asphyxiation. There are lots of other self-bondage risks that are there. But of course, Shay Tiziano teaches wonderfully of how to be able to safely do self-bondage. Or you get the impact things, which are kind of tongue-in-cheek shown in Secretary, like whacking yourself on the butt with a paddle or a hairbrush in that movie. Which kind of works, but not really, because it's really the connection with the other person. That's what you're really trying to do. Is yes, you might want that sensation, but you want it in connection to another. All that said, starting with celibacy, I think, or starting as a solo practice, which you can think of as a celibate practice. That does not mean a non-sensual practice, which I believe is at the core of the Buddhist discourses on mindfulness of the body, is that celibacy means that you are not engaging another individual on this planet. You might be engaging with spirits of people. You will definitely be engaging with your senses, but you start from yourself, and that will help you to build a foundation to recognize what you truly need, desire, want to receive and to offer in the present moment. And then from that, eventually you can add in other people if you so desire. And so Savatsky, for me, is that was a big turning point. That when I read Savatsky's Tantric Celibacy book, and also I had a partner at the time who was the one that said, hey, you need to read this so you can understand it more, because they also were a Tantra practitioner and they were quote unquote more advanced than I was. And so I felt like I was stumbling a bit, and so they were like, read this book. And it helped. It allowed me to start practicing Tantra on my own. I didn't have to wait until they were in the room to be able to practice Tantra. And so understanding yourself, your mind, body, spirit self in the present moment, how that fluctuates, and how, a moment ago you talked about desires. And so to really start to unpack your desires, what are your desires versus what you saw in a movie or read in a book or a blog post or something else. Like, what are the desires that you're fed by society, the social, cultural, political engine, that make you think that you want things, so you'll go out there and buy products, versus what you truly desire, which might require you to buy a product, but quite often it's as simple as you just feeling sensations on your skin, light, wind, touch, whatever those things are. And then you also talked about pay, and I have not gone down the rabbit hole yet to figure out where this whole sort of fear of money thing came from. We all need to eat food, and in a society that no longer patrons artists or monks or scholars, we need to somehow gain our groceries. So someone at some point does need to pay us, unless we have gardening skills, in which case we still have to pay for water, and we still need to buy seeds and soil and things of that sort. So money is always going to be involved in our lives in current society. And so to consider pay to be toxic or bad is similar to the asceticism of saying the body is bad. Greed, I would say, is the bad thing. Abuse is the bad thing. There are many people who brought Tantra, brought yoga forward to the world, that yes, they earn money in this process, but how do they go about doing it, right? Goenka, who brought forward Vipassana meditation, is very open that they were a capitalist, that they had a very successful business for a very long time, and then they sort of stumbled upon Vipassana, and then they sort of dove into it for 10, 15 years, and they were like, this is the thing that the whole world needs to know about. And they very purposely created a brand, and with the intention of bringing that around the world. Though I'm a fan of Goenka, I personally have studied in that lineage, and so it is personally very meaningful to me. But it also does have this capitalistic patina to it, because it was created by someone who was deeply culturalized in capitalism. And so the version of mindfulness of the body that Goenka brought forward is only the first stanza of the Buddha's mindfulness of the body. Only brought forward the mindfulness of breath. The rest is there if you go deeper, but at the surface level of Vipassana, which is then the foundation of modern day sexual mindfulness and trauma-based mindfulness, it is all based on only the first stanza of the Buddhist discourse on mindfulness of the body. It doesn't go into the rest of it.
I agree with majority of your statements over here. Just to clarify, when I mentioned the payment aspect of it, I wasn't referring to the Guru Dakshina. So there is a stipulated amount of money or anything in terms of goods or services that one needs to provide to the teacher who is teaching. It is considered an exchange of energy, without which it's going to be an imbalance of energy, because there has been an educational exchange with nothing being gained on the other end. With respect to the pay I was talking about, I was referencing this capitalism, or this world that we live in, with which flourishes on this business mindset of extorting people with ideologies that may or may not help them, but at the same time does bankrupt them quite a lot. With reference now, let us move this conversation a little ahead, because you mentioned Upasana, you mentioned mindfulness meditations, and we just touched upon trauma a little bit. So let us look into first of all, let's look into for an individual who doesn't have much of this knowledge, and say solo practice, or getting into it as you, completely as yourself, as opposed to bringing someone else in, is somewhat ideal for that individual to gain more knowledge about themselves before actually diving full on. So what are some exercises or practices that you could recommend for this individual who's listening in right now?
Sure. And you're specifically wanting me to speak in the lens of trauma, yes? Or no?
You can speak, not at all. You can speak on the topic. We'll touch upon trauma. So
okay, no problem. The feed cut for a second there, so I lost a word. So I just wanted to clarify. And so I think the key to all this, whether we're talking about trauma or otherwise, is to learn to trust yourself. And I grew up in the United States, and so there are a lot of things I was told on how to think and how to feel. However, your gut knows, right? There's that whole concept of gut instinct. And so to trust your gut, and to understand that your gut, your literal gut, your bowels, your stomach are part of the enteric system, which your brain is also part of, and your gut actually does think. And in the Tantra world is also why Sanskrit was so important, because it was a sung language. It engaged your polyvagal nerve, engaged your whole body as the language was spoken, and so as people conversed with each other. And so to be able to start to trust yourself. And if you don't trust yourself at first, that is okay. Right? There's this idea of double consciousness, whether you look at W.E. Du Bois' ideas around double consciousness or Ken Wilber's ideas on witnessing, to start where you are. Where you are is wonderful, amazing, and perfect. It might not be where you want to be tomorrow or next year, but it is perfect because it's true. It's your real self. And to trust that and to feel whatever you're feeling. And if you're feeling apprehension, if you're feeling curiosity, if you're feeling excitement, all those things are real. And to trust those feelings. And the more you can trust yourself, the more that flower will start to blossom, and you can see between the petals, and you can see the nuances of what you are feeling. What is this fear is all about? What is the curiosity all about? What is the excitement all about? And as you start to trust yourself more, and as you can sort of dive deeper into the nuance of your unfolding, your blossoming, that will create the pathway for you. That will allow you, just like if you follow your cravings for eating, that, I don't know, I love chocolate, so maybe if I ate chocolate every single day, maybe, might be good, might not be good, it depends on what form of chocolate. But, right, if you follow your cravings, you're going to follow what your body needs, what your mind, body, and spirit needs. And so those curiosities, those aversions, all those things will lead you to books, those will lead you to videos, those will lead you to teachers and to workshops. And they also will put up some flags when you feel caution and you need to be hesitant and not read that book today, not go to that workshop today, not go to that book, not read that book or go to that workshop ever. Ask more questions if you're feeling hesitancy around things, or just pause and be quiet with yourself for a moment to give yourself the respect and the appreciation for any aversion you're feeling. And you don't ever have to push through something. You don't ever have to do anything. The only thing we have to do is breathe. And so that's also why I always bring people back to breath in the mindfulness practices, because it is the one unifier of all people on the planet. All of us have to breathe at least once every 2 minutes. And it is a practice that we can all share because everyone has to breathe. It is the only thing you truly need to do. Water, food, eventually you need to do those. But you can actually go a good amount of time without those. You can go for your entire lifetime without reading certain books or studying with certain teachers. But to stay present with yourself and what you need in the moment. Does that help at all?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was a very beautiful way of putting it. So, coming from a field of Reiki, because the majority of my practice has been in Reiki, and it divides its time between Buddhist, Tantric, and Hindu philosophies, and looks at it from a healing perspective, from the chakra-based system. I often tell people that the best guru that they can ever find is them themselves. Because nobody has ever gone through life. Nobody has the same viewpoint. No one looks at life or experience better than them. And we are often brought up in this world nowadays wherein we are taught to disconnect, to rather fit in as opposed to being yourself and being authentic. And often that disconnect causes individuals to forget that there ever existed an inner voice, because you're constantly trying to appease the others or the world around you rather than the world inside you. And it is very difficult, of course, and coming from a trauma experience in my life, many of them, it is very difficult, of course, for individuals who have gone through something traumatic to actually find themselves. It could be very scary. So, for those who are getting into this practice at any point, anywhere, any kind of mindfulness practice, uh, try and make sure that you have something physically present in front
Mm-hmm.
of you. It could mean a cup of tea, it could mean a teddy bear, it could mean a ball, it could mean a cat, anything that you have in front of you. That when you actually touch that particular item, when you touch that animal, when you feel the sensation, it brings you back to the present. No matter how far off you may travel in your experience, be it forward, be it backward, be it within yourself, it is often necessary
Mm-hmm.
for you to have an anchor in this physical realm that will help you feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
So safety will always come first. And of course, beyond that, the best approach I would say is within yourself and in the present, looking at how varieties of these energies flow across your chakras in your body. How does it feel when you take a glass of, let's say, a cup of tea
Mm-hmm.
and you drink? When you drink that particular beverage, how does it feel? What does the energy look like? What color is it? How does it flow within yourself? Where is it that you feel a little off? Where is it that you feel discomfort? And go back and forth in a dialogue with yourself, trying to figure out where that discomfort ever originates from. And that possibly is the best experience one can have with or without any guru being present, because and by that I mean an external guru. You
Mm-hmm.
anyway have one inside
Mm-hmm.
you. Because ultimately, in the end, we are all creatures living our best selves, and we are meant to experience things. And the fact that you're alive today and having experienced whatever you've experienced, your body, your guru did the best they could in order to make sure that you stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
So never in your life question or get disheartened or say things like, oh, I don't trust myself. Trust me, if there was anyone else, you don't know how that concept or that situation might turn out to be. But you know that the only person you could trust is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the only one that you can rely on for surviving is yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a few things. So one is, as I've been listening to you, I also have been thinking about ritual, and I've been appreciating the beautiful earrings that you're wearing, and thinking of ways that you can remind yourself to be in the present moment. And so earrings, other piercings, like the ritual that those come from is present mindedness, right? It is being in the present moment. It is going through a threshold, a passage from your former self to your current self to your future self. And they're a way to remind yourself of that ritual. And so that's the beauty of tattoos and piercings and things of that sort, is they're a way to be able to carry something with you if you are in an environment where you're not clothed, right? If you're naked, you can't necessarily bring a cup of tea with you, or like I often, like if I'm needing to be mindful, I have this little quirk that I bring with me, and I'll put it in my pocket. But if I'm at an orgy, I don't have pockets, and so having something that your hand can touch, that your eyes can gaze upon, that you bring with yourself, that reminds yourself ritualistically of the idea of being present in the moment, the idea of who you intend to be, can be very, very helpful. And so, I mean, you do you. So I'm not saying that you have to go out and get 500 piercings, but if it would be helpful to you, right? Like to have an earring, to have a belly button piercing, to have a septum piercing, to have just with a sharpie, just to put a dot on the crux between your thumb and your first finger, just so that you can gaze upon that little dot you put on your hand to remember to be present. That it can help you so very much. And also when you're talking about the chakras, that I love the chakras, but also to recognize this idea of this blossoming, this idea of unfolding. And so the chakras, of course, are very real, but on some of them also they're a simplification of something much more complex. And so if you're studying and people talk about the chakras being a specific area of your body, yes and no, right? To visualize it, to understand, to comprehend through that, eventually will help you understand how it's part of a larger whole. It's part of a larger system, a part of a larger spirituality, embodiment, that your throat and your crown are connected. They're not separate. And so of course, having that number of chakras is more helpful than a dualistic system that has maybe one or two or three things, right? In the United States, where you're told, oh, you're thinking your brain, so you're thinking your head is an important thing. Oh, it's about your genitals. Oh, now we've got like two things. Maybe people talk about your heart. Well, your heart definitely does not do any thinking, but the conveyance between the different aspects of your body, the polyvagal theory, the way that we have the meridians and energy channels across our entire body, those expressions that are our entire body, not just the throat, not just the third eye, not just these physical concepts of something, but rather the larger energetic manifestation, larger energetic connectedness from yourself to all that is. That's where you're trying to go. But you start with your breath, right? Vipassana. You start with feeling the wind, feeling the air in the turbinates of your nose swirling around. You start there. You start with just a few square inches of your nose, and then eventually to the back of your throat, and then maybe to your belly, and maybe your diaphragm, and then maybe your perineum. Maybe. But you start where you are, and this is one of the things which I love, and I need to find the recording of Goenka around this, because they said it so simply, but basically, if you get off the path, that's okay. Go back. So you're focusing on your breath, and you're eventually, okay, great, I'm feeling all the things, and now I'm feeling my body, I'm feeling my perineum. Oh my goodness, I've lost it. Cool. Go back to the nose. Start over again. Like, that is beautiful. That is wonderful. And so if you're in the orgy, if you're at a bookstore, wherever you are in the present moment, to have something to remind yourself, to have something, whether it's a little polka dot you put on your hand with a Sharpie, or whether you have a septum piercing, whatever you have to help you remember to come back to the present moment, to come back to where you are right now. So you can then read that next book. You can go to that next orgy. You can practice that next thing, or drink that next cup of tea, one thing at a time.
That is completely spot on. One with the concept that there aren't just physical locations for these chakras. If there were, it would have been much easier to actually locate them. Because it isn't that easy when you're doing a body scan, because people are completely different and their positionings are completely different. Moreover, we have been taught only the seven, wherein I think there are about 120 something now, and we don't teach them on a broader sense, but that is because there are majority of these experiences are experiences. They're not meant to be quote unquote just learned and written down. They're never meant to be just written down. They're meant to experience for yourself and look into various junctions at your body where you can feel these energy bursts that are for those individuals, and I have met individuals who are not comfortable with breath practices, and are more visually or touch oriented. Uh, for uh, for the touch aspect of it, what I recommend is circular patterns. There is something so amazing about circular patterns, wherein when you start drawing them with your finger on any body at any location, it not only pulls the person back into the present, into and actually focus on that particular area of the body, it also ensures that they connect with you on a very personal level with just that area that you are talking about, that you are physically touching, and you're having that intimacy bond that is developing, that is beyond the narrative that the popular culture actually speaks about when they talk about intimacy. When you're talking about yourself itself, there are times that when individuals lose themselves in a crowd or in orgies or in parties, and they are often lost and don't have a footing and need an anchor as such. What I do is I just take the wrist, and the wrist being the most sensitive area of any body, one of the most sensitive areas, just draw the infinity symbol again and again and again and again, lightly with the tip of your nail, and you can see yourself just coming back into yourself and zoning in all the energies into one space. So that is one of the practices. And of course, you've got the infinity symbol, you have the concentric circles, you just have the water waves. You can just do different types of water waves, and you will see that the individuals do come, not only come into the space, into the body that they're inhabiting, but also get aroused. You don't need to have genital stimulation all the time. There are various other ways of stimulating an individual beyond the genital stimulation, and trust me, this can be something that they may not have experienced ever in their connectivities with other individuals.
Quite true. And I think one of the things I always remind people is, even though genitals are delightful, they're a few square inches of wonderful skin and flesh, that the statistical average body has at least 9 pizza boxes worth of skin. And so the few square inches of genitals might be really fun, but all of that skin can be really fun. And you only need 3 nerve endings to feel the full spectrum of everything. And so, yes, there can be thousands in other parts of the body, but you don't need thousands, you only need 3. And so pretty much your entire body has at least 3. And so you can explore all those things every place. I really like you talking about circles, because we were talking about trust a little earlier. And the beauty of the circle or the infinity is the creation of trust. There's a predictability to it, right? Once someone does the circle once, and they start lap number 2, your brain's like, oh, I know what's about to come through this. It's like if you do a roller coaster, the second time you do the roller coaster, it's still exciting, but it's not quite as scary because you know the curves, you know the things that are going to happen. And so the infinity or the circle can allow you to start trusting in the present moment, trusting what you are doing to yourself, or trusting what the partner is doing with you. And in that trust, you can start to blossom and open up to feel what you're feeling in the present moment. And some of those apprehensions can start, not go away, but start to melt or to loosen a little bit, so that you can start opening to the present moment. And so the water cascading that you're talking about is beautiful and awesome. And yes, whether it's on the forearm or the entire body, I mean, for me, like, doing that with my hair is the hair of my head. Like, oh my goodness, I'm getting all tingly just imagining. However, it's not as predictable. And so if I'm feeling apprehensive, start simple. And so this idea of that circle or that infinity symbol that you're putting forward is such a beautiful idea, because it's simple, it's predictable, it's a limited area of the body that you can agree to, having only that part of the body. And if you start cascading across the body, people can be a little tempted. Oh, well, that's only a centimeter past where we agreed. Oh, that's only an inch past where you agreed. Maybe it'll be okay. And there's a risk there, because as you get excited, this is part of my pushback on enthusiastic consent. Enthusiasm means that you're not grounded. And so consent needs to come from a place of full capacity. And so there's this acronym HALTS, which is H of hungry or horny, A for angry, L for lonely, T for tired, and S for either sick or stressed. If you're feeling any of the HALTS factors, and if you are excited, if you are horny, if you are aroused, your capacity is diminished. And you might be okay with taking on that risk of changing your agreements on the fly. However, with less capacity, there's a higher risk of you making a choice in the moment that you might regret down the road. And so to stay as much in your full capacity, to start with that simple circle, that simple infinity on the wrist, on an area of your body that feels as safe as possible for you. And then in a week, a month, a year, a decade, then maybe you're going to be doing the cascading of fingers or the cascading of 10 people's fingers across your entire body. I mean, it could be wonderful either way, with the circle of just your own finger and wrist, or 20 people touching your whole body. These are all wonderful things, and there isn't a goal. You don't have to get any place. The place you're getting to is yourself, and trusting yourself and listening to yourself in the present moment.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing in consent into the conversation. And I was wondering, why didn't we have this before when we actually started the conversation? But thank you so much for bringing that in. Because a majority of the time, what you just spoke about in terms of enthusiastic consent, I have seen that a majority of the times that a lot of individuals who are trauma bonding, who are trying or desperate to create connections and end up creating connections. One, of course, they want to, and two, because they're extremely enthusiastic about it and they're over aroused in that context. And when you talk about consent not coming from a grounded space, I understand that. For people who are probably the tops, or I wouldn't say tops, for people who are the doms in the relationship, who technically do need to take care of the individuals who are coming in, how do you suppose they differentiate between enthusiastic consent and one that is coming in from a grounded space? And how are they supposed to, because at times individuals get too carried away with where the conversations are headed and where the energy is headed and the sensuality awakening is happening, that they completely forget to take a pause, take a deep breath, revisit the set of rules and regulations or the book of consent that they have agreed upon. So for these individuals who are supposed to take care of their partner, how do you suppose they break the situation, go back, revisit the book, and then come back into the space to get the individual ready for any further situations they would like to consent?
Sure. Well, first I just want to start with some basics or terminology definitions. So you said the dominant, and so I would like to just simply define dominant, submissive, top, and bottom. And so in the kink world, topping is a person that is doing the physical thing and bringing those physical sensations to another. A bottom is the person that is receiving those physical sensations, and those could be light and fluffy or really intense. It can vary. Dominant submissive is people that have a power exchange, an energy exchange. The top and bottom tends to be physical. It might have an energetic, spiritual component, emotional component. It might not. The dominant submissive, where you have a team leader and a team member, the dominant being the team leader, that is part of a team. They're not just doing whatever they want. They're part of the team, acting as the leader for that team of that one or multiple submissives. That is a energetic and emotional, a spiritual connection that might or might not have a physical component. So someone can be an asexual dominant and be 100% a dominant. You don't have to use floggers. You don't have to do any of the kinky things you see in the movies to be a dominant. However, you also can be a top or a bottom and not care less about the whole energetic connection and emotional piece, because, pleasure activism. So just wanted that piece. And so, and then also you use the word book, which, you're awesome, so I'm not picking on you, but just that word, in case people are now imagining some signed contract, because people love these internet contracts you can download, and then you're going to have this written thing just like they had in the, what was that?
50 Shades of Grey.
Yes, 50 Shades of Grey movie. I mean, believe me, once upon a time I had written contracts. I thought it was cool. I used to go to the bank and have them notarized, and it was all sexy. We'd go in fetish wear. It was lots of fun. However, it's a living document, right? It is not the Ten Commandments etched into stone by lightning. It is not the Constitution. It is not a legal document. It is a living document, which means it has to breathe. Putting things right can be helpful because then you can have clarity, you can refer to something, but it's a living document that you need to touch base on as often as possible. I would recommend a minimum, if you have a long-standing relationship, at a minimum that you check in once a month. So for me, like the full moon is when I like to do check-ins, because it's a way for me to remember, oh right, full moon, need to do a thing. However, you should really check in every single evening or afternoon before you start something, and you should check in the midst of things, right? And you need to be careful because, right, the whole capacity thing, as people get all excited and turned on, the capacity will be diminished, and so their ability to make decisions that would still feel good for them when they're, the next day, that can be more risky. And so that's part of the job of the person, quote unquote, in charge, right? The top or the dominant, is to recognize that either the other person or your own capacity is getting diminished. And capacity can be diminished on either side of the equation, and it's risky on either side. And so if one's capacity is diminished, to not change any agreements, to not go any further, to not push any edges or boundaries. And so an important thing to have is for a way for both people to be able to have some kind of check-in to figure out where their capacity is. And depending upon their agreements prior, when they're in place of as close to full capacity as possible, to be able to have agreements in place of what is okay. What are we going to be doing now? What are the things that we might explore in a curious way to see if they're okay now? And if we are exploring in that curious way and we recognize we might be approaching an edge, how can we recognize if capacity is still there to be able to communicate, yes, it's okay to continue in this place of curiosity or to approach that edge? Because if capacity is diminished, very quickly step backwards away from the edge, right? Go back to where it's safe, step away from the cliff edge, and go back to that safe place that you both fully know, that you both fully agree to, in a place of as full capacity as possible. Also recognizing we probably only have full capacity for the first 5 minutes of the day after you slept really well and ate really well the day before. 5 minutes later, you're going to start thinking about your taxes and work and taking care of the kids and all those things. So your capacity is diminished about 5 minutes into your day. Depending upon how your day went, your capacity might be more and more diminished. Or depending upon how horny you are, or how excited you are, or how turned on you are, your capacity might be more and more diminished. And so that's the dance. That's the tricky part of all this, is to be able to stay in that place of as full capacity and communication. And the interesting thing about trust isn't about always staying in the safe place. Trust is about taking risk together with another person and coming back without harm, and knowing that you took risk and that risk did not create harm. That is how we create trust. Not that I'm saying that you should go to those edges, but just to recognize the only way that you truly trust people is by taking very teeny weeny incremental risks And that could be as simple as going from a circle on your wrist to an infinity sign on your wrist, right? It doesn't have to be huge and complicated. It doesn't mean you need to be hanging from one toe or some complicated, shibari or fire thing or whatever. Like, it can be as simple as going from a circle to the infinity on your wrist. That's simple. Or maybe the circle gets bigger, so it includes the palm of your hand, maybe down to your elbow. That's it. Maybe that's your entire container for the entire evening. Maybe that's your entire container for the entire weekend. Or it might sound wacky, but really, truly, you could spend an entire weekend just doing a circle on someone's wrist or someone's forearm, and there's so much rich beauty, subtlety, nuance to that, so many different sensations that you're going to feel. You could spend an entire weekend just doing that. And it's going to be so amazing, because with every breath you take, your body feels differently, right? Your metabolism is digesting food. Your energy is going to be fluctuating. The temperature in the room is going to fluctuate. Your arousal is going to fluctuate. The amount of sweat that's pouring from your body is going to fluctuate. So with all these changes, every time that finger comes back around the circle, you're a whole new person. You can experience that circle all over again. And so really, to stay in that place of trust and very slowly, incrementally move towards your curiosity. That doesn't mean necessarily to your edges or to a place of risk or a place of harm, but just where you're curious. Where do you think there might be some more nutrition that you've not explored before? Or where do you think there's nutrition that you have explored before and you want to go back there? You can be curious for what you've done before. You don't have to only be curious for the things that you haven't done. And then there was, I had another thought which I know, unfortunately, just lost. I don't know. It might come back in a second.
Well, this was highly illuminating, and I don't know about you, but my capacity seems to be energized for now. Contributing to the awakening of my energies for the night. I want to be mindful of their time and of your time. So, Fredrick, for this evening, for this night, for those who are listening in, do you have any parting words or any wisdom that you'd like to share?
Sure. The simplest thing is, wherever you are, that is the perfect place to be. However you're feeling, whether you're feeling happy or sad or whatever those sensations are that you're feeling in your body. If you're feeling, if you have chronic pain, if you have asthma, if you are feeling oppression, if you are feeling loved or hated, all those things are perfect because they're the truth of your present moment. And that's what W.E. Du Bois talks about. That talks about the double consciousness of being present with the icky, being present with the things that you don't prefer because they're real, and to give them the space they need, the respect that they need, so that you can possibly heal around them. And in that space that you create, you can then follow your curiosity, you can follow your ideals, you can follow your hope, and to recognize with every day you have a reality, and stay present in that new reality every day, to stay present with those new curiosities every day, and stay safe. And generally I always tell people, don't try more than 3 things at a time, So if you're going to a Tantra Puja for the first time, then just going, that's 1. Doing a circle, that's number 2. Talking to people they haven't met before, that would be number 3. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to jump into the orgy the first time. If you want to, you do you. But still, only 3 things at a time. And so consider those 3 things, and everyone processes differently. And so for some things, you might need a millisecond to process it. For some things, you might need a month or a year or a decade to process it. But while you're processing that is one of your 3 things. And not until you finish processing, until that is part of your groundedness, to consider adding another thing, because you then have the capacity to engage, to be curious, and to process that new thing. So stay safe, have fun, and be present.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, for all the listeners out there tuning in, thank you so much for joining us today in this vast, vast exploration of this field. And thank you for being explorers. Fredrick, thank you so much for agreeing to be on this podcast and sharing your wisdom. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Nixi, and thank you for tuning in to NightCap. If you're still curious, do check out the parent website at pillowtalkwithnixi.com, where we discuss all topics under the banner of neuroscience, psychology, anthropology, social behaviors, and human sexuality. Until next time, thank you and good night.